Fargo, North Dakota, 2009. Home to 49-year-old Philip Gattuso. His older brother Roy described him as a big softie, always polite and friendly, a great listener, and a very gentle person. He was a well-respected and well-known dentist running his own practice for the last 7 years. His patients loved him and said his calming demeanour and big smile made a sometimes scary visit much easier. After high school, he had gained his biological sciences degree in Louisiana before settling on dentistry. He met and married his first wife, and the couple had 2 sons, Philip Jr. and Joseph. The couple would eventually split, and Philip made the move to Oklahoma City to take some extra courses in the hopes of running his own practice. And it was here that he met a music-loving waitress, Valerie. He asked to take her out on the same day and fell head over heels for her. They shared a love of jazz, cooking and travel, and married in 2001. By 2003, Philip's career was really on the up, and he had finally achieved his dream of taking over a practice. He and Valerie moved into a condo on South University Drive and soon welcomed their daughter Kennedy. Sometime after Valerie became pregnant, however, she started having heart trouble, and after she gave birth, she was scheduled in for surgery to repair a mitral valve. 2 weeks after this photo was taken, and when Kennedy was just 2 years old, Valerie underwent heart surgery. But it resulted in a serious complication. She had to be medically sedated for 2 months, staying in hospital for a total of 9 months, battling organ failure, blood infections, and mini-strokes. Valerie's family and Philip were fighting about where Valerie should receive her treatment. Her family said Oklahoma City was one of the few places with a doctor that specialised in what she needed, and this was also where her parents lived. But Philip, after lengthy research himself, believed he'd found a local hospital that would provide the best treatment and give her a better chance of getting a heart transplant. After much conversation, Valerie and Kennedy ended up moving in to live with Jean and Sharon in Oklahoma. Phil had been trying to take as much time off to be with her as he could, but with a mortgage and mounting medical bills, along with everything else, he had to carry on working. And Valerie would feel a little safer knowing that there would be people in the house all the time. He was upset about the move and didn't want to be away from Kennedy, but he knew that it would be more comforting for Valerie to have her there. Tragically for everyone, Valerie sadly died. Kennedy came back to live with Philip, and although he was being as strong as he could for his now 3-year-old, friends said he felt like his world had been damaged beyond the point of repair. He said he felt like he had been grieving her loss for a long time already, as he knew deep down she would never fully recover and things could never be the same. But no one could believe she was gone. As heartbroken as he was, he never let Kennedy see his pain. He grieved privately and cried alone, keeping everything as normal as possible for her. It was business as usual, colouring and games before breakfast, work at the practice, and dinner and movies for when Kennedy came home. October 26, 2009. At 8:30 a.m, Philip dropped Kennedy off at her daycare and headed back home for a 10:30 a.m. conference call. Now it was just him and his daughter, and with no family nearby, he had started putting things in place to scale back his working hours, and he had scheduled this call to start handing things over. Almost 12 hours later, just after 7 p.m. A good friend of Valerie and Philip's, Julie Willett, got an unexpected phone call from Kennedy's daycare. When Valerie passed away, Julie and her husband really stepped up to help Philip, and she was one of the few people listed as an emergency contact for Kennedy. The daycare said that Kennedy was still waiting for her dad. Philip had not turned up to get her, and they hadn't been able to contact him all afternoon. This had never happened before, and Julie knew something had to be wrong. Worrying he'd fallen at the house and hurt himself, she started phoning around to try and get someone to pick Kennedy up, as she and one of Philip's neighbours went to his condo. All the doors and windows were locked, so the neighbour climbed the fence to try and get in through the back door of the garage. Peering inside, he noticed Philip's Porsche was missing. They managed to get the garage door open and get inside. The condo was a total mess. Drawers were open, photo frames and paintings had been knocked off the wall, there was smashed glass and furniture was overturned. It had been totally ransacked, and there was no sign of Philip. It was silent when they called out. It seemed whoever had done this was long gone. Julie tentatively went towards the master bedroom, and it was here that she found her friend. Philip was lying on the floor, his head surrounded by blood. Julie described it as an out-of-body experience and said she watched herself calling 911 and she can't remember what she did. Soon the police, ambulances and local media were outside. Kennedy stayed with Julie that night and she didn't understand what was going on, so the Willets decided to try and make it a fun sleepover. Kennedy asked all night when her dad was coming to get her, until finally at 3 a.m. she fell asleep. Police started calling around Philip's family members with the news, but almost everyone lived out of state and wouldn't be able to get into town for a while. They called Jean and Sharon Kirkpatrick too, Valerie's parents, and they were terribly upset. The detectives said for this to happen so soon after losing their own daughter, it was a nightmare. Kennedy was now without anyone, and Jean and Sharon got ready for the almost 900-mile trip to bring her back to their house. It seemed that robbery was the motive, and then the burglar or burglars realised Philip was in his bedroom. He had tried to fight them off and they had killed him before stealing almost everything. Including his Porsche, there were missing TVs, laptops, cash, cameras, DVD players. The police said you name it, if it was electronic or worth a decent amount, it was gone. The autopsy showed that Philip had been beaten to death, and the shape of the wounds indicated that the murder weapon was something with a circular impact area, like a hammer. He had been hit on the head at least 10 times, and his skull was so fractured the examiner said it was like broken glass dropped on the floor.
Of 12 condos is tucked away off the main drag of South University. It's quiet and almost hard to find. That's part of why people who live here are so shocked that one of their neighbors, kind and soft-spoken, could have been the target of a homicide.
We'll treat this as a suspicious death until we can rule out any aspect of this.
His 1999 silver Porsche Boxster stolen.
Detectives determined that he had never made his conference call, so he must have been killed between about 8:45 and 10:30 a.m. Knowing this made them question things even more. It was clearly not only a violent attack, it felt very personal, and ultimately, it was just so risky to do this in broad daylight, with everyone coming and going to work and dropping their kids off at school. It was definitely unusual. There were no signs of a forced entry either, no broken windows or damaged locks, so did Philip know his killer? Whoever had done this had been in the house a long time. They were in no rush and took their time clearing everything out. It seemed they knew that they would not be interrupted and that no one else would come home. Jean and Sharon, along with their daughter Reagan, soon arrived to pick Kennedy up. Sharon called Julie and asked her to bring Kennedy to a restaurant to meet them. Julie reminded them that it was the middle of a murder investigation and perhaps they should all stick around for now, so she invited them over for lunch. It seemed they were processing so much that they didn't ask questions and didn't want any answers. The police said the Kirkpatricks were allowed to take Kennedy back with them, and Reagan's family were given temporary custody. But before they left, Valerie's dad, Gene, spoke to the police. He couldn't think of any enemies that his son-in-law had, or that he had issues with anyone.
I don't think Philip has any people that don't like him. Yeah, I think he's well-liked.
But he did mention that Philip liked to go to the casino. He was a big poker player, and the only thing that kept him wondering was that Philip might have owed someone money. It would surely explain why so much had been stolen too.
The only thing that's bad, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but he loves poker. I'm not going to use the word gambling. He used to go to, I think, the casino every Saturday.
Officers spoke to some of the regulars at the casino, and a lot of them did know Philip. They were shocked to hear about what had happened to him, but were not aware that he owed anyone any money. He was a good player, they laughed. He rarely lost out. It had seemed a really promising lead, but it didn't look like an occasional game of cards held the answer to what had happened to him. With no witnesses in any of the neighbouring condos, detectives were hoping that there might be something on a few cameras around the area and that they would get a hit on Philip's car's number plate. Philip's house was surrounded by lots of shops and restaurants, and the bowling alley just across from his place did offer up some footage. The owner showed them that at 7:30 a.m, a pickup truck with a trailer at the back had pulled in, driven around to face the road and just parked up. No one got out, and given the fact they didn't open until 11 a.m, it was just a strange time. There were only 3 other cars parked there, but the owner said they were the same each morning. It was just other workers starting their early shift. But this truck had really stood out to him, and he couldn't put his finger on why. 16 minutes later at 7:46 a.m, the truck's lights had flashed and someone got out. They couldn't tell anything about the person, but they were walking in the direction of Philip's condo. Another camera opposite showed someone walking quickly, moving behind buildings as they went, but it was only their legs in frame. At 10:46, what looked like it could be a light Porsche came driving down the road. Philip was already dead by this time, so whoever was driving that car was definitely his killer. It headed into the parking lot of an apartment building just to the right of the bowling alley. The tow truck then pulled out and drove in the same direction. And at 11:30 a.m, both the truck and the trailer now towing the Porsche drove back in the opposite direction. A resident in the apartment building told investigators that at about 11 a.m. that morning, she had looked out of her window to see a dark pickup truck and a silver Porsche attached to the trailer on the back. She sheepishly said she was quite a nosy neighbour and she just had to know what was going on, and thank God she did, the police thought, because this was their first proper lead. This was a very nice car, and the whole scene just looked weird to her. She decided to grab some bags and throw them into the main bins, making an excuse to walk past and snoop. She said the person attaching the car was a middle-aged white male with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled over his face. "Nice car," she commented. "Oh, it's not mine, I'm just moving it for a guy who bought it on eBay," he replied without turning around. She stayed for a moment longer, but it was clear that the man was in no mood to talk. They enhanced the footage and, using her description, the police appealed to the public and were surprised at just how many tips they had got.
Video from the nearby businesses would catch glimpses of a black pickup with a U-Haul trailer attached and a man walking to Gattuso's townhome off South University Drive.
One man at a rest stop about 20 minutes away said he recognized the man and the truck instantly. He had been stood by his car and watched as the man in the truck pulled up, but the car on the trailer was covered over. He tried to make some small talk about where he was driving to and the likes, but the man seemed more focused on making sure the car underneath was completely shielded from view. The man, also being a bit nosy, pulled up the tarp to have a peek. He complimented him on the car, a lovely silver Porsche. The man mumbled something about eBay and then started heading inside with a plastic bag. The other driver noticed a red stain on his trousers, but at the time thought nothing of it. The cameras inside the rest stop were very good quality, and this confirmed everything he had said almost to the minute. The driver of the pickup truck, and now their prime suspect, walked into the service area to use the toilets, still carrying a black plastic bag. At one point he looked right in the direction of the camera, and this was the first time they saw his face. About 5 minutes later, the man walked back out, in new jeans and a new t-shirt. The cameras on the outside of the rest stop showed the truck and the Porsche driving away, and this was the first time they could just about make out a license plate. Enhancements showed that it was an Oklahoma license plate, and that the truck had been rented. Finally, on October 31st, just 5 days after Philip was killed, the police announced they had made an arrest. The truck had been linked to a Michael Nakvinda. He had a long history with the law, including accusations of rape, kidnapping, home invasions, and armed robbery. He had pleaded guilty to 1 count of kidnapping and 9 counts of robbery with a firearm in an exchange for a 20-year sentence. He was released on October 24, 2002, having served 8 years of that 20-year sentence. Michael now worked as a handyman, just doing odd jobs around town. The name meant nothing to Philip's family or friends, and there was no connection that anyone could find between Michael and Philip. They lived almost 900 miles apart. Near Michael's home in Oklahoma, officers located a storage unit that he had recently rented. Inside was the stolen Porsche, and inside that was a hammer with Philip's blood and hair on it, and most of the stolen items from the house. Michael sat in custody saying absolutely nothing. However, after talking to his mother, she revealed the connection. Michael was the handyman of none other than Gene Kirkpatrick, Valerie's father and Philip's father-in-law. Everything was pointing towards a murder-for-hire plot. On November 2nd, the police brought Gene in for an interview. People said Gene had placed blame on Philip for the loss of his daughter and thought once he was out of the picture, they could get full custody of Kennedy. Gene didn't want Kennedy being raised by Philip.
What do I say?
Gene,
The truth.
the truth.
Well, I just feel like he was going to ruin her life, make her miserable and unhappy. She'd just have a horrible life.
The only way for that to happen is if Philip's gone.
That's correct. I thought her future welfare was more valuable than his life. One of the things I said to him was, Mike, there's some problems with doing this. I said, I'm not saying I wouldn't want to do it. But I said, if I do something like this, we won't get away with it.
Friends and family could not believe what they were hearing. He did everything he could for his family, and the devastation he felt when Valerie fell ill and eventually passed away had consumed him. In the interview, Gene said he had vented about Philip and admitted he had made comments to Michael about wanting him dead, but he described it as locker room talk, something that Michael had taken seriously without him realising it. He didn't think his handyman would actually do anything he said. But later he started to backtrack and admitted to police what they already knew had happened. I guess I gave him the green light. Everything was his suggestion, but I was right there with him. He said he felt awful for considering it, thinking that Kennedy would see him as a monster. She's going to say, my grandfather killed my daddy, he said. At the end of the interview he asked, am I going to jail right away? It scares me, the consequences. Police found that Gene had paid Michael $3,000 in cash to kill Philip, with proof that he had handed this over in a McDonald's parking lot. Gene also promised $10,000 more and whatever he wanted to steal from Philip's house. Gene sent him a video of Philip's condo and Porsche. Despite how everyone else had described Philip, Reagan said she believed him to be a cold person and a narcissist, saying he couldn't relate to people's feelings. No one in Philip's life recognised what the Kirkpatricks were saying. It just made no sense. Roy said his brother's death was the result of selfishness, revenge, and complete obsession after Valerie had died. Roy said that Gene had made repeated comments pressuring Philip to promise that if Valerie passed away, he would let them have full custody of Kennedy. Philip refused every time and told his brother that his relationship with the Kirkpatricks had started to deteriorate rapidly. In one conversation with Roy, Philip said he was starting to worry about his own safety after so many threats from Gene. Gene Kirkpatrick was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, and Michael Nakvinder was charged with first-degree murder alongside burglary charges.
The identification of Mr. Kirkpatrick as a suspect in this case is, once again, as I've said in the past, a combination of investigative leads, physical evidence, testimony, all of which led us to believe that Mr. Kirkpatrick had conspired in the death.
There's new information about Gene Kirkpatrick.
Eyewitness News 5's Linda Mattis has been digging throughout the day. Linda, what have you learned?
Jessica, we actually broke the news to the Kirkpatrick's housekeeper that he was in jail, and she says she can't believe that any of this happened. We knocked on the Kirkpatrick's door in eastern Oklahoma City, but no one answered. Investigators say Gene Kirkpatrick hired another Oklahoma City man, Michael Navidka, to drive to North Dakota and kill his son-in-law, Philip Gattuso. They tell us Kilpatrick hired the hitman over a family custody battle. He didn't like the way Gattuso was raising his granddaughter ever since her mom passed away. Right after the murder, investigators say the Kirkpatricks drove to North Dakota to pick up the toddler. Gene's wife, Sharon, called their housekeeper on the way.
She called me to say they weren't going to be home because they needed to go north because their son-in-law had an accident. They had to go for their granddaughter.
I talked to the housekeeper and her neighbor. They both rent from the Kirkpatrick family, and they say that they are all very nice people. Again, they can't believe that any of this happened. Now, coming up tonight at 6, we'll hear from Philip Gattuso's brother, who says that he wants his niece as far away from Oklahoma as possible.
One of Jean's old friends said that he was a first-class person who would do anything for you. He called the allegations against him 100% out of character. I have never had anything shock me as much as that did, he said. Michael pleaded not guilty to all the charges, as did Jean. But Jean managed to get a $1 million loan from a friend and bail himself out while awaiting trial. On November 4th, Philip's funeral was held. Kennedy was not allowed to go, but Philip's first wife Karen and her mother Catherine attended. They had both stayed close to Philip, and they, along with Philip and Karen's sons, and many more from the community, came together to say goodbye. After a custody battle, a judge ordered Reagan to give up temporary custody of Kennedy so that she could live with Roy, Philip's brother. Roy said he was overwhelmed with joy to have Kennedy in their family home.
This afternoon, Michael Nakvinda appeared in a Fargo, North Dakota court to see if the case against him will go to trial. And while there is a chance for a plea bargain, the judge says he does not plan on granting any extensions for the trial. He wants it to start on August 10th. The state's attorney is asking for some additional forensic testing on one item.
Sometimes forensic evidence gives you lots of information, sometimes it gives you inconclusive information, and it depends sometimes on how you have separated the sample.
But Nakvinda's attorney does not want the sample tested. He thinks it could be destroyed and hurt his client's case.
Obviously, we would like to preserve enough of that sample so that the possibility would exist that we could have some independent testing done.
In February, Kirkpatrick posted a $1 million cash bond and is now back in Oklahoma. Both Nakvinda and Kirkpatrick have pled not guilty. And as far as Gene Kirkpatrick, a trial date has not been set for him.
Just over a year after that fateful October day, Michael Nakvinda took to the stand in his own defense.
This, in the end, turns out not to be that complicated. Find the defendant guilty.
They can't put Mike and Fargo at the crime scene. Therefore, the intentional murder charge is unprovable. You're going to have to return a verdict of not guilty.
He was denying murder, claiming that he had been framed by Jean, and was under the impression that he was only picking up a car that Jean had purchased on eBay.
He started going into detail about velocity, minutes per second, bullets, calibers, and then Jean said, no, if I want it done, I want it done closed up and personal.
What did Mike Nakvinda get in return for this friendship and trust? In the end, he got betrayed, and he got framed for a murder he didn't commit.
And Jean testified that when they were talking about killing Philip, it was in jest, so anything Michael took from that was out of context, and if he'd killed him, it had only been out of his own volition. More than 30 people testified and 300 pieces of evidence were shown to the court. Michael Nakvinda was finally found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
But first, we have some late-breaking news to tell you about. A North Dakota jury just convicted a Metro grandfather of hiring a hitman to kill his son-in-law.
We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled action, do find the defendant, Gene Carl Kirkpatrick, guilty of the offense of conspiracy to commit murder.
In July 2011, a jury also found Gene Kirkpatrick guilty, and he too was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
I was very, very nervous and very scared. But obviously, the prosecutors, like I said, did a phenomenal job.
Roy Gattuso, Philip's brother, believed all along that Michael Nakvinda was just the weapon, but Gene was the man who really killed his younger brother.
We now will have some closure, and also Kennedy will have some closure in the future as she gets older. That's most important to us.
Gene, what's your reaction to the verdict?
I'm surprised.
You're surprised?
Yeah.
Do you still deny this?
Yes.
Despite all the letters sent to the judge about how people had got it all wrong about Gene, the judge said he saw through it. Your friends and family do not know the dark side of you. The dark side that the jury saw. The dark side that conspired with Mr. Nakvinda to send him some 900 miles away to this community of Fargo to bludgeon Mr. Gattuso to death, all for your misguided ends. Kennedy was later awarded almost $10 million in damages in a wrongful death lawsuit filed by her family against Jean, and there is now a permanent restraining order that keeps the Kirkpatricks from having any contact with Kennedy. Reagan said she would never try to enter Kennedy's life, but hopes that someday after Kennedy turns 18, she might look them all up. "We'd love to know that she's doing well and that she's happy and has had a good life," she said. She visits her father in prison a few times a year and still believes he's innocent. "He does not have what it takes to take someone's life," she said. In 2016, more than 6 years later, a judge ordered that Philip's $3.7 million estate would be divided equally between his sons Joseph and Philip Jr. and Kennedy. Kennedy went to live with Philip's niece in the New Orleans area, and Julie is still close to Philip's family and sees Kennedy every few years as well. "She's doing very well. She's turning into a beautiful young lady," Julie said.
This weekend marks 10 years since one of the most high-profile, horrific murders this area has ever seen. The murder-for-hire beating death of Fargo dentist Philip Gattuso.
It was a crime that shocked everyone in the area, and 3-year-old Kennedy lost both her parents in the space of a year. Friends said that Philip, devastated by the loss of his wife, was more focused than ever on being the best dad he could be, but this was snatched away from him and his 3 children. And for what? It was such a senseless murder that ruined so many lives, and it is a case that will always leave more questions than answers.